Marisol felt a swirl of nostalgic apprehension as she stepped off the bus onto the familiar, sun warmed pavement of her hometown. The late afternoon light cast long shadows over the rows of quaint brick buildings, each with its own chipped paint and sagging porches that seemed to groan beneath the weight of old memories. It had been 6 years since she packed her bags, certain that this tiny place of weekend car washes and twilight walks along the single lane highway had no further hold on her. Yet here she was again, suitcase in hand and mind brimming with recollections she had thought she'd buried. She had come home for the ceremony, a community driven project, replanting centuries old oak saplings in honor of the town's founders, including her grandmother. The request from the Historical Society had been simple. All the living descendants would gather, plant a new oak near the community center, and speak of what the future might hold for this once thriving place. Marisol's grandmother had been a local legend, a teacher widely admired for her warmth and generosity. Through sheer force of love, she had molded countless students into adults with open hearts. Now, the new oak would serve as a living tribute to her grandmother's work and spirit. Marisol had pledged to attend, knowing that part of her had never truly left this place of wide fields and narrow minds. The day she received the invitation, she felt the stirring of something like hope. She brushed a strand of dark hair away from her eyes. A hint of the orchard breeze lingered in the air, carrying the familiar scent of apple blossoms from the outskirts of town. Taking a deep breath, she pulled the handle on her suitcase and made her way down the sidewalk. The shops were mostly shuttered, a sign of the local economy's slow struggle. She recognized the barber shop, the cafe that doubled as a bakery, and the classroom supply store where her grandmother used to buy stickers for her third-grade students. Traces of comfort mingled with a melancholy that settled like a gentle bruise against her heart, a reminder that time could change so much, but not always for the better. One face flashed in her mind, a face she had tried not to think too often about before stepping foot in town. Shay Camden, the one person who had made her last year of high school both maddening and oddly thrilling. Their rivalry seemed eternal, self-perpetuating. They argued in class, tussled over debate team points, and refused to see eye to eye when it came to the future of the student council or even the decor of the homecoming dance. In her teenage mind, Shay was the embodiment of arrogance. He was always so certain he had the right answers, so sure the world would someday revolve around him. Back then, Marisol's identity seemed to revolve around systematically proving him wrong. She often told herself her anger came from the way he dismissed her ideas, but if she dared admit it, maybe it had been something more complicated than simple resentment. As she neared the community center, Marisol noted the posters taped in its windows. Historic Oak Restoration Project, Monday at 2 p.m. That would be tomorrow. Today they would gather in the small meeting hall, share tea and cookies, and finalize who would speak at the ceremony. She had been assigned a role to share a memory about her grandmother. Heart pounding, she worried her voice might crack from the vortex of grief and pride that still swirled within her, even years after her grandmother's passing. She steadied herself at the door, rubbed her sweaty palms together, and stepped inside. The community center entrance smelled of old books, wooden floors, and just a hint of disinfectant. A small group of familiar faces turned to greet her. Agnes Riddle, the volunteer librarian, reached out for a gentle hug. Mark Renshaw, still short in stature and big on personality, offered a broad smile. They led her to the main hall, its walls covered in banners made from colorful construction paper cutouts of leaves and trees. Tables held trays of homemade cookies, likely contributed by one of the local church groups, along with large pitchers of iced tea. As Marisol took the cup of tea Agnes offered, she felt someone's gaze upon her. Turning, she caught sight of Shay. He stood by the far end of the table, holding a small cup and a cookie, clad in a charcoal sweater and pressed trousers that contrasted with the casual vibes of everyone else. His blue eyes sparkled with the same intensity she remembered from their high school years, but the rigid set of his jaw was gone. Instead, his expression was unreadable, calm, but watchful. A strange flutter mingled with the tea in her stomach. Before she had much time to process, Mark called everyone to gather. Eager to avoid a scene, Marisol found a place at the edge of the circle, clasping her hands to hide how they trembled. The meeting commenced with an introduction of those present and their roles. Her name came up, and Agnes announced that Marisol would be sharing a few words at tomorrow's ceremony about her grandmother's dedication to teaching. At that moment, Marisol's gaze flicked to Shay again. The corner of his mouth quirked, a tiny gesture nobody else would have noticed. Perhaps approval, perhaps something else entirely. The group talked logistics, from the arrangement of chairs to the timing of speeches. Throughout the discussion, Marisol stole glances at Sheikh, rarely spoke but instead observed with an air of quiet seriousness. A question rose in her mind. Where did all that brash confidence go? Where was the young man who could never bite his tongue? Something must have happened in the 6 years since she last saw him. The curiosity simmered in her veins. The meeting ended promptly, with Agnes instructing everyone to reconvene the next day. As Marisol gathered her things, she felt a gentle tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Shay standing much closer than she expected. She took a half step back, startled by the old habit of wanting to brace for verbal sparring. "Marisol," he said quietly, "welcome back." He paused, perhaps aware of her tension. "I'm sorry if this is awkward," she forced a polite smile. "Hi, Shay. It's been a while, hasn't it?" He nodded, glancing sideways. "Would you like to get coffee? Or maybe just a short walk, if you have time?" His voice was a far cry from the haughty tones she recalled. Gone was the sneering confidence. He was subdued yet direct, something she never would have imagined. Even so, she felt a slight pushback inside, a defensive reflex from teenage grudges left unresolved. "I suppose a walk would be fine," Marisol replied. She could hardly tell him no, not in front of so many onlookers who had just applauded the notion of town unity. Besides, she had come here to pay respects to her grandmother, and part of that was opening channels of kindness even to an old adversary. She mentioned she was staying at the local inn, and he suggested they stroll along the side streets that bordered the orchard. Outside, the late afternoon sun gave way to a grandfatherly glow, bathing the leaves in gold. They walked in awkward silence at first. Marisol stared at the plane of his face from the corner of her eye, noticing a slight scar near his left eyebrow she didn't remember from their teenage years. Finally, Shay spoke. "I heard you moved to the city. How is everything out there?" She shrugged. "Busy, competitive, chaotic sometimes, but maybe that's what I needed." A shaky laugh escaped her. "Sometimes I think about this place and wish I didn't resent it so much when I left. I can appreciate now that small towns can have good, honest hearts." He took a moment to reply, observing a cluster of apple branches overhead. "It's easy to see the faults in a place you've known all your life. I felt that way too, for a while. But I ended up coming back, eventually." The mention of his return intrigued her. "What brought you back?" He glanced at the orchard, then let out a breath, swirling with some unspoken weight. "My mom got sick. I needed to help take care of her. After she passed, I stayed, mostly to manage some local projects she was involved in. The oak replanting was actually one of them." An unsteady compassion welled up in Marisol's chest, forcing her to recall all the times she had misunderstood him or assumed he acted through nothing but arrogance. People changed, or maybe she had never truly known him to begin with. "I'm sorry to hear that," she offered softly. He nodded a silent thanks. They reached a small clearing by the orchard fence. Apples hung in half-formed clusters, still green from spring. Late summer warmth blanketed the scene, the wind whispering a slow lullaby through the leaves. Setting aside old hostilities, Marisol realized there was a gentle sorrow about him now. They soon arrived at the inn. Neither spoke about the complicated history between them. They parted with a fleeting exchange of polite goodnights. Yet, that evening, As she crawled into the old four-poster bed in her cluttered inn room, Marisol found her mind replaying their conversation. The memory of how his guarded eyes softened when she shared her condolences lingered. She wondered how many more secrets lay behind that stoic exterior. The next day dawned bright and promising. Marisol dressed in a lightweight linen sundress that fluttered at the hem, bracing herself for the heat. She tucked a folded copy of her speech into her handbag, uncertain if she'd be able to read it aloud without trembling. At precisely 2 o'clock, the townspeople gathered around the flagged-off area near the community center. A tall sapling oak, supported by wooden stakes, waited to be lowered into a fresh patch of earth. Agnes, wearing a Sunday hat studded with faux flowers, led the ceremony. After an invocation and expression of gratitude for the generosity of donors, the speeches began. A few local officials gave remarks about the importance of heritage, and some older residents shared stories about the original oak that had once stood near this spot. Then Agnes nodded toward Marisol. She walked forward, heart thrumming wildly. She glanced at Shay, who stood in the crowd, arms folded. Their eyes met for a second. Taking a breath, she unfolded the pages. "I've lived away from here for 6 years," she started in a voice louder than her usual speaking tone. "But I cherished this town's heart for far longer." She paused, letting the hush of the onlookers sink in. "My grandmother taught here for decades. She believed in nurturing every seed of potential in her students, encouraging them to grow strong and proud, just like an oak tree. Even now, I remember how she'd open our back door at sunrise, gather fresh dew, and whisper to me about the importance of investing time and love in the soil from which we grow. Today's ceremony reaffirms that belief. By planting this sapling, we declare faith in the next generation and remember the warmth of the last. It's a promise and a tribute. I thank you all for letting me speak on behalf of a woman who devoted her life to planting hope in every learner's heart." Emotion seized her throat, and she lowered the pages, her voice trembling on the final words. "May this oak remain steadfast, just as she was." Scattered applause broke out, and Agnes ushered her gently to the side. Marisol's eyes grew misty as the memory of her grandmother's hug, the smell of chalk, and the dusty old classroom rose to the surface. She exhaled unsteadily while the next speaker addressed the crowd. Finally, it was time to plant. 4 local volunteers helped guide the sapling's root ball into the freshly dug hole, piling the soft dirt around the trunk. Children sprinkled water from colorfully painted watering cans. Everyone, from young to old, watched with reverence as the symbolic act of renewal came to fruition. Just as Marisol quietly stepped away, letting others line up for the next part of the event, she felt a presence at her side. Turning, she saw Shay, his calm demeanor etched with a sense of understanding. "That was brave," he said. "You spoke beautifully." She swallowed the knot in her throat. "It wasn't easy, honestly." "I know." He paused, as if weighing his words carefully. "Hey, I know a nice spot beyond the orchard near the creek where we could talk. Would you like to meet me there in an hour? It might be quieter than in this crowd." Though a small part of her warned that spending more time with him taunted the old wounds. Curiosity and an unfamiliar yearning swayed her. She nodded. "Yes, I'd like that." Following the ceremony, the crowd dissipated into smaller clusters. People headed for refreshments, some posed for photos by the new tree, and others collected tools. Marisol excused herself to the inn to freshen up, replaying Shay's invitation in her mind. Curious how quickly her perspective shifted, she realized she wanted to peer behind the curtain of who he had become. An hour later, she arrived at the orchard's edge. The tall grass beneath her sandals swayed like a sea of green. Shay stood near a narrow break in the fence that led to a winding path through the trees. Afternoon sun shone through the leaves, scattering golden shapes on the ground. He waved her over, gesturing for her to follow, maintaining a slow, comfortable pace. They walked side by side along the winding path for a while in companionable silence. Every once in a while, he pointed out interesting details: a cluster of wild raspberries, a hawk circling overhead, small wonders that seemed to anchor their quiet awareness. She found herself appreciative of his gentle commentary, discovering new angles to a man she had once regarded solely as a rival. After twisting through the orchard, they emerged beside a shallow creek. The banks were lined with smooth stones and the water meandered lazily, reflecting the dappled sunlight. A fallen log stretched across one bend, creating a makeshift seat. Shay gestured for Marisol to sit, and she lowered herself onto the mossy trunk. The hush of the orchard, broken only by the babble of water, gave the place an air of unspoken serenity. Did I ever tell you how much I actually admired your dedication back in high school? Shay asked, not allowing any preamble. You pushed me so hard in debate club, and sometimes I wanted to hate you for winning arguments that I thought I had locked down. Even after it all, I never forgot that sense of being challenged. She managed a slight chuckle. I never would have guessed you'd say that. I felt the same, like you were this immovable object in my path. Somehow I think we pushed each other to be better back then, even if it drove us both crazy. He dipped his gaze, nodding. I guess at the time it felt like I had something to prove to everyone, to teachers, to classmates, even to myself. As I got older, I realized that trying so hard to be right all the time could blind me to other things, to empathy, or to deeper connections. Her eyes drifted to the creek's surface, watching the sunlight shimmer across the gentle ripples. We all grow. I wasn't so different from you. I left here certain that the only way to be happy was to escape. Only later did I see the subtle beauties I was leaving behind. They slipped into a comfortable quiet, each letting the other's words sink in. Warblers sang in the trees, and a light breeze ruffled the orchard's leaves. Finally, Shay ventured, "When I learned you were coming back for the ceremony, I felt nervous, I guess. I remembered the way we parted, trading bitter barbs at graduation. I didn't want that to be the final chapter of us." "Me neither," Marisol admitted. "It's strange, but so much can change in 6 years. It seems we both dealt with tough things. Your mother's illness, my grandmother's passing, and it shaped us in ways we couldn't have foreseen." He approached a step closer, settling on the trunk a short distance away from her. "I hope you won't think I'm just saying this because we're here and the ceremony is done, but I want to try and let go of the past. I can't erase the fact we were at each other's throats, but maybe we can rewrite our story to something gentler." A half smile curved across her lips. For a moment, she wondered if the name she had for him, enemy or rival, no longer fit. "I'd like that," she whispered. He slowly reached a hand toward hers, pausing to gauge her reaction. When her fingers curled softly around his, a warmth spread through her chest, fragile, yet sincere. She contemplated the swirl of nerves and cautious wonder. Here, near the creek where the orchard's reflection mirrored the renewal of life in her hometown, she felt the first stirrings of a new bond, delicate but promising. A part of her recognized the irony. Never in her wildest dreams had she imagined that she might sit with Shay, hand in hand, at peace. That evening, they went for a light meal at the cafe with the chip paint shutters. Over cups of homemade soup and fresh bread, they spoke softly of their hopes. She told him about her freelance writing career, how she traveled a lot, seeking fresh outlets for her creativity. He opened up about stepping into his mother's philanthropic efforts, coordinating local charity drives and environmental programs. "I'm nowhere near the father figure of the town," he joked, "but if I can keep these projects alive, I think I'll honor my mom's dedication." Marisol smiled, feeling respect and fondness for the way Shay had grown. "She'd be proud, I'm sure. You're keeping her legacy going." As dusk set in, they parted ways outside the cafe, with an unspoken promise to reconnect soon. Marisol wandered back to the inn, armed with a sense of calm she hadn't thought possible upon returning. Memories drifted through her mind like old photographs. But instead of lingering on grudges, she now saw glimpses of possibility. Maybe small towns, like the people in them, could reinvent themselves. She spent the next morning collecting a few of her grandmother's personal items from her old house, which now belonged to a distant cousin. Tucked among them was a faded photo of her grandmother standing near an oak tree with a group of wide-eyed students. One face stood out with bright blue eyes, no more than 9 or 10 years old, a seriousness in his features. Shay, one of her grandmother's many pupils. Marisol's heart thumped hard. How eerie and how beautiful that they had this connection long before they became rivals. It was a testament to how time could twist and turn, forging new stories from old roots. Early that afternoon, Shay texted her to ask if she wanted to see the old school. She agreed, thinking it might be nice to walk the halls that her grandmother had once filled with laughter and learning. They met at the school's main entrance, each wearing gentle smiles that spoke of newfound understanding. Inside, the building was quiet, classes long dismissed for the summer. Shafts of warm light spilled through large windows, illuminating the familiar corridor decor. Rows of faded stickers, chipped lockers, and motivational posters from another era. Marisol felt a pang of bittersweet affection as she stepped into the classroom that had once belonged to her grandmother. Sweeping her gaze over the child-sized chairs, she pictured her grandmother standing at the blackboard, chalk in hand, the lines on her face made by endless smiles for her students. Half lost in reverie, she felt Shay's comforting presence beside her. He gestured to an old plaque near the door, the one bearing her grandmother's name. Dedicated to Mrs. Hartwell, inspiration to all who enter. The corners of Shay's mouth turned up in a quiet tribute. She spent hours after school helping me with my reading. I was a shy kid, didn't speak much, but she believed in me. Marisol blinked back tears. She gave all of us that gift. Turning to face him, she found Shay observing her with a softness that eased her vulnerability. In that hush, the ghosts of their teenage quarrels seemed to fade into near insignificance. Some intangible barrier gave way, replaced by a gentle magnetism. She stepped closer, and his hand met hers again, more confidently this time. "Thank you for sharing that memory," she said, her voice wavering just enough to reveal her emotion. "It helps me see there's more linking me to this town than old pain." The crisp classroom air buzzed with an undercurrent of something tender. He nodded. "There's so much love here, sometimes buried, but still vital. I think you and I are proof that things buried can resurface, sometimes for the better." They stood there, heartbeats in unison, a quiet acknowledgement passing between them. She was the first to lean in, though it might have been a simultaneous instinct. Their lips met in a shy, fleeting kiss, delicate, like the first opening of a blossom in spring. Yet the gentleness carried an intensity that spoke of healing and renewal. The murmuring of their breaths filled the quiet classroom, an intimate vow that they would not let the past define their future. When they finally pulled apart, they shared a reflective smile. Marisol's cheeks grew warm, and Shay's gaze held hers with surprising vulnerability. There, in the classroom dedicated to her grandmother, they felt their new connection take root. The next day, Marisol prepared to head back to the city. She couldn't linger in her hometown indefinitely, though part of her longed to stay, exploring this new relationship. As she rolled her suitcase to the bus station, she felt both excitement and sadness. Shay arrived a few minutes later, carrying a small envelope. He offered it to her, explaining that it was a modest donation to her freelance writing project. A statement of faith in her dreams, just as his mother had once invested faith in him and her grandmother had done for so many kids. "I don't need your money," she objected softly, but the statement lacked any real conviction. She knew this gesture was about more than monetary value. He gently squeezed her hand. "I want to be part of your growth, however I can." He paused, swallowing something thick in his throat. Will you come back again? Soon? She nodded. Yes. This isn't a goodbye. It's just, see you later. Their parting kiss was brief, but filled with a promise that the fragile spark they had discovered would keep glowing. As she boarded the bus, she clutched the envelope, already planning her next trip to plant deeper bonds in the soil of home. Seated by the window, she watched Shay grow smaller in the distance. The bus rumbled away, leaving behind the orchard's silhouette and the fresh planted oak that stood sentinel in her hometown. But in Marisol's heart, its roots ran deep, reminding her that even the most unlikely connections could blossom under the bright light of understanding and kindness. She gazed at the photo of her grandmother she had tucked into her phone case, the woman who taught uncountable children to believe in their capacity for growth. It hit her then. Her grandmother would have loved to see this new chapter, the bridging of old rivalries, the blossoming of compassion. The miles between town and city might stretch long, but that distance no longer felt daunting. Resilience lived in the seeds they had sown. Joy, memory, and romance, woven together, marked the beginning of a new journey, one in which she and Shay could nourish each other's dreams, planting hope in places once thought beyond redemption. In the soft hum of the bus engine, Marisol smiled to herself. She clutched the envelope carefully, giving silent thanks to the place she had once so desperately wanted to flee. Under the care of patient waits, abiding love, and second chances, old wounds could indeed heal. Tomorrow's sunlight would fall on freshly turned earth and newly sprouted feelings. Proof that, despite everything, some roots only stretch stronger and deeper over time. And now, through the tender warmth Shay had offered, Marisol finally understood that the soil of home could yield surprising flowers if watered with acceptance and renewed faith in possibilities.